Hey, welcome into Strictly Speaking. Good to have you here. You know, with the two, not one, but two recent assassination attempts of President Donald Trump, it has brought back a whole lot of conversation about other assassinations and assassination attempts. The most famous, of course, well, one of the two most famous, I suppose, would be one of the assassination of JFK. We're coming up on the anniversary of that as well. So this is a perfect time to talk about JFK. And it's a perfect time to talk to James DiEugenio, one of the leading Kennedy assassination theorists on the planet. He's got a book that's just about a year old, came out last year, that is fascinating. The JFK Assassination Chokeholds, the inescapable proof there was a conspiracy. And this is a terrific look. You're going to find evidence in this book, just from what I've been able to observe already, that would have compelled any jury to decide that Lee Harvey Oswald was not guilty, beyond a reasonable doubt anyway, in the death of John F. Kennedy. You may also find inescapable proof that there was a conspiracy and there were a number of bad actors that a lot of people have theorized on and speculated on, but have not come up with the proof. Maybe this book has exactly what we're looking for. A little bit about James DiEugenio. He's an MA in history from Cal State Northridge. He's a retired teacher. He's written or co-edited 4 different books on the assassinations of the 60s. Destiny Betrayed, The Assassinations, the JFK Assassination, The Evidence Today, and JFK Revisited. That last volume is the companion piece to Oliver Stone's 2 recent documentaries on the Kennedy assassination, JFK Revisited, Through the Looking Glass, and JFK Destiny Betrayed. He wrote the screenplays for both of those films. Jim is the editor and publisher of an online journal called KennedysAndKing.com, which features articles and news stories and critiques of works about the 4 major assassinations of the 60s, JFK, Malcolm X, MLK, and RFK. So today we go deep inside the assassination of JFK right here on Strictly Speaking. Jim, it's so good to talk to you. Thanks very much for making the time for us here on Strictly Speaking. How's it going?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So the book title, the JFK Assassination Chokeholds that inescapably proved there was a conspiracy. I love the setup as much as anything else. 10 chapters, 10 separate chokeholds. And I want you to speak to that, what that exactly means, what a chokehold is, but 10 specific examples or ways in which you can, without a shadow of a doubt, prove that this was not a lone nut situation with Lee Harvey Oswald. Tell me about that title. Tell me about the word and the phrasing of chokeholds.
Well, that title. It comes from a guy named Malcolm Blunt, who's a British researcher, and he was talking to one of our co-authors, Paul Blow, and he said, and this is in the book, the Oswald file at CIA is something that there is no benign explanation for. Okay, you cannot explain how that was set up and how it's all set up so wrong in any kind of innocent manner. To me, that is one of the chokeholds in the JFK case, okay, that proves that there was a conspiracy, okay, in this case to cover up who Lee Harvey Oswald was. So Paul borrowed that phrase, chokeholds, and said, let's expand this into other directions that will show that there are certain pieces of evidence, certain areas of exploration in the JFK case for which there is no innocent, you can't explain it away in any kind of innocent way or accidental way. So that's why we titled the book as we did.
Well, I like that. And just for those who have not yet picked up the book, and I'm sure they will by the time we're done with this conversation, Chokeholds 1 through 10 are the 10 chapters in the book. And you do start with who Lee Harvey Oswald is. And you talk about his intelligence links. So I don't know if we're going to work through them 1 through 10. We're not going to read the book to our audience today. But I want you to give me some highlights about some of these things. And then we're going to play off of them with some of the typical standard questions that even casual observers or historians, loosely based, have when they talk about this. When we talk about the magic bullet theory, and of course, everybody remembers the JFK movie that Oliver Stone, you obviously work closely with him on the documentaries. But between that and Ruby and the Warren Commission and so forth, we'll get into some of the more common questions. But let's try to look at chokeholds 1 through 3. Those are all about specifics about Lee Harvey Oswald, and I'll just ask it generally, since you phrased it this way: who was Lee Harvey Oswald?
Lee Harvey Oswald was an undercover intelligence operative, okay, working for both as a CIA agent provocateur and as an FBI informant. All right. And this is why he was getting Russian training while he was in the service. Or he was learning the Russian language, sent over as a false defector, and the Russians knew he was a false defector. That's why they exiled him to Minsk, 400 miles away from Moscow. And since he could not really do anything productive there, he came back to the United States and he was put to work on the anti Castro campaign, okay, especially in the New Orleans area, posing as a Castro sympathizer, okay, while actually being a guy monitoring who those people were, to a slight edge in Dallas, to a larger edge in New Orleans. Now, why is that so important? The reason it's so important is this: on the night of the assassination, what happens is that all of these things that Oswald was doing in New Orleans gets blasted in to the media, television, because there were newspaper extras that day. Okay, and you see this lonely figure, on these city streets, and this goes ahead and labels Oswald as a communist. All right, and this is supposed to provide the motive for his shooting of JFK. Nobody ever thought of looking behind the picture. Okay, was Oswald really a communist? I mean, to give you just one example, I'm sure you're aware of. On one of the flyers that Oswald was handing out that summer, he stamped the address of 544 Camp Street on the flyer. All right. The Warren Commission never explored what was, because that wasn't his address. Okay. What was at 544 Camp Street? All right. And so later on, Jim Garrison, who's a DA in New Orleans, walks down to this building and holy Christ, this is where Guy Bannister's office was at that time. All right. And this is, and now hardly anybody knows that that flyer is in the Warren Commission volumes. I think it's in volume 25. All right. Who the heck ever read to 25 is probably nobody. All right. But that's where it is. All right. So the question becomes, why didn't the Warren Commission go ahead and delve into this mysterious address that he stamped on one of his flyers? All right. Now that's one aspect that we try and go into with a lot more depth, because what we went into in the book was the CIA file on Oswald. This will take a minute or two, but I think it's worth going into.
Okay.
During the days of the House Select Committee, there was a woman named Betsy Wolfe whose job was to examine the Oswald file at CIA. Before she got into that, she asked for every charter for every division in the CIA, and she read every single one of them. She then put up on the wall a graph that said, this is what Oswald's files should have done once it hit the CIA. She then asked for the actual file, and she was shocked because it didn't do anything like it was supposed to do. All right. So she started interviewing people. All right. And said things like, why was there no 201 file set up on Oswald? That's the most common file in the CIA. Any defector to Russia should have had a 201 file set up at CIA. It didn't. There was no 201 file at CIA on Oswald. Didn't happen for 13 months. All right. Then she asked, why did this file go to the Office of Security? Why didn't it go where it should have gone, which is the Soviet Russia division? That question, that question that she asked right there, nobody could answer it until a few months before the House Select Committee closed its doors. She then talked to a guy named Robert Gambino, who was at that time the head of the Office of Security. And he told her this: look, it doesn't matter how many pieces come in, it doesn't matter if they're pre stamped. If the client goes to the first gate, which is the Office of Mail Logistics, and he requests that all those papers go to his office, that is what will happen. And in other words, what I'm trying to say is this: somebody was rigging Oswald's file from the minute he left for the Soviet Union at the CIA. Why?
So 60 years later, do we have any idea? First of all, how many people
That,
are asking that question? Outside of your book, you and your co-authors,
yeah.
I've never heard the name of Betsy Wolfe before, and I've heard the name Gambino, but from the other side, and that's the whole Jack Ruby mobster connection. I know that's not the same Gambino, but
No, it's not the same
but
guy. Yeah.
no, but I mean, these are names that are, it's kind of weird. You would think that after 60 years, we would kind of know all the players and these kinds of things. I've not heard of the name Betsy Wolfe before, nor Robert Gambino, nor what you just said. If somebody was manipulating Oswald's file long before this ever happened, before he went to Russia, you would think that that would have come up in the commission, right? Wouldn't that have come up in the
Yeah,
commission?
oh, yeah, it should have. It definitely should have, but it didn't.
And
Okay. And
and
in fact,
after all these years, we don't know why.
let me tell you this, which is very interesting. Betsy Wolfe's investigation, to my knowledge, is only in her handwritten notes. It's only in her handwritten notes. It was never typed in the memorandum form, to my knowledge. So that's why it's not in the House Select Committee volumes. Now, can you imagine publishing 12 volumes of evidence with that not in there? I mean,
Yeah.
that's really mind-boggling. And so my friend Malcolm Blunt fished that out, I think, in 2005 from the declassified files at the National Archives, and he sent it to me with a cover note that said, "Jim, Betsy Wolfe was on the verge of a mega discovery at the end of the House Select Committee. So I'm sending this to you because you'll probably appreciate it." And that's how I found out about it. And that's how it's in the book.
So what do we know about Betsy Wolfe? Why was it not transcribed? Why was it not, entered into the actual record?
I really, really wish I could answer that question. I really do. Because in my opinion, um, the whole profile of Oswald and the House Select Committee, this is more important than anything else that's in there. Okay. But it's not in there. And so you have to wonder, you know did the CIA have influence over the committee? Now, I'm not saying yes or no. Okay. But what I'm saying is that's what this question leads to, because I have no idea why it's not in there, you know and Betsy Wolf
How
from.
were the handwritten notes discovered then? If it wasn't typed up and entered into the actual record of the commission in their final report, what somebody just found her note paper somewhere?
They were classed. There were 435,000 pages that the House Select Committee stored in the National Archives when they shut their doors. Okay. And this was a part of it. And Malcolm Blunt, a British researcher, found it. Oh, he's an amazing guy. Okay. He found it, and he mailed it to me.
So explain this part of it then, because of what you said about being declassified. That was declassified. Obviously, we're all trying to figure out exactly when and if any president, and I've heard you talk about this, about what Donald Trump did and about what Joe Biden did or has done about declassification. Yeah, Trump, I think, has been the most braggadocious, if you will, about saying, I'll do it, I'll release this, I'll do that, because he's a maverick, that's his personality and so forth. Are we ever going to get everything declassified, do you think, ever at any point in time? Or will it end the United States intelligence communities? Will it end the United States government as we know it?
Again, that's another question that I wish I could answer. Now, Trump has had a change of heart, okay? And now he has said that if I'm elected, I will declassify everything. Okay. All right. Um, Now, we have a couple of sources on this. Bobby Kennedy Jr. All right. That's why one of the reasons I think he agreed to appear on stage with him. All right. And Andrew Napolitano, who said he talked to Trump about this issue. I'm sure you're familiar with the
Yes.
conversation. Okay. All right. And so I really do hope Trump is telling the truth about this. Now, what's come out is that it was Mike Pompeo who convinced Trump not to declassify. All right. And in fact, uh, when Tucker Carlson actually talked about this, according to Tucker Carlson, Pompeo's lawyer called him the next day and warned him about this. All right. So and by the way, anybody who says that Kennedy assassination is a dead subject, I mean, you're not aware of all this stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Okay, because it's very, very interesting and compelling. All right. So now Biden, I'm glad you mentioned that because
Mhm.
I believe what Biden did was even worse than what Trump did. Okay. Because what Trump did was a delay action. All right. What Biden did, I believe, actually counters the law, which is called the JFK Record Collections Act of 1992. Because if you look at the law, the CIA and the FBI and the State Department, etc., they should not have anything to say about what gets declassified or not. Everything should have been dispensed with in 2017. All right. Biden set up a panel which actually gives them a voice in saying, well, yeah, this, maybe this, let's keep this redacted. See, that's going back to the days of the Freedom of Information Act, which is what the review board was supposed to counter. Okay, and then let me give you an example of how the review board did this. The FBI comes in and the review board put a document on a screen. And the chairman of the board said, unless you come up with a great excuse, we're going to declassify this document. And the FBI guy who was there with his lawyer turns to his lawyer and he says, can they really do that? And the lawyer says, yes, they can. Okay. See, that was the difference. All right. That was a difference. In a Freedom of Information Act case, the plaintiff has to prove why the document should be declassified. With the review board, the defendant had to prove why it should not.
Right.
Okay, but what Biden has done, he's changed that. Okay, see, this is all a dodge that began in 2017. Every last piece of paper should have been declassified then, because that's what the act says. All right, and it's really sickening, that this is still going on.
What does that say, Jim, about the united effort, I guess, to cover everything up? I mean, aside from what we'll go through again, more of the chokeholds in your chapters in your book, this to me says conspiracy more than anything else. The fact that Republicans and Democrats, right and left, that can't be in the same room with each other, particularly today, we're at a time of great division. And yet, boy, oh boy, they will sure unite when it comes to let's keep the secrets, the greatest secrets or the worst secrets, depending on your perspective, from the American people for as many decades as we possibly can. That to me says something.
Yes, and look at it this way: what Biden did was usurp the powers of Congress. Literally, that's what he did. He overturned the JFK Record Collections Act. So here's my question: why aren't both the Republicans and Democrats stomping on the floor about this? Why aren't they angry about it? Why is it not even being discussed? Why are we letting the president take away our powers? And by the way, that act back in, I think, 1992 or 1993, that was passed almost unanimously.
Hmm.
All right. Both houses. All right. But suddenly now, because there's no hubbub about it, now Congress is out, Democrats and Republicans both, because the Republicans control the House, the Democrats control the Senate. Nobody's saying anything about what Biden did. It's unless you have to go on a show like this, you have to do something like this to bring it
Right.
to the public's attention. I think it's really outrageous.
I do too. It's really inexplicable. There's nothing that would make any sense out of that. Jim, let's
See,
go
and
back.
I'm glad you said that, because this is the kind of thing that leads people to think there has to be something in there that they're hiding. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't.
There
But
has to
this
be.
kind of behavior leads to that obvious conclusion. So what do they expect to happen? And
Looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck.
right,
It's a
right,
duck. If they're going to hide something this much, there must be something to hide. I mean, I don't think
right.
that's. I don't think
And
that's.
it leads to this terrible cynicism about government, you know?
Oh yeah, of course, and I suppose we could do this in a lot of other different things where accusations of cover-ups and conspiracies and so forth have been levied at the government. Some of them I don't want to believe, some of them I do believe, and but the more they play these shell games like this, the more people in newer generations are going to just say, yeah, we live in a country that is not much better than others. Our government is just as corrupt, just as covert as many of the Eastern European governments that we routinely mock and say that are threats to humanity. I want to go back to Oswald for a moment here and talk about chapter 3/chokehold 3, and that is the impersonators, the impersonation of Lee Harvey Oswald. This is also something I had not known about. Who was impersonating and under what context?
Well, on in these numerous examples, okay, that Matt Crumpton put together, there seems to be a kind of constellation of impersonations and impersonators, because in the instances described, the impersonator is not consistent. He looks differently in these certain situations. This indicates that some higher power is going ahead and manipulating these instances, of this pre-assassination uh, impersonation ruse. Let's get specific. Let me name a couple of examples.
Okay.
A very prominent example is the Sylvia Odio incident, which you're probably familiar with. Okay, and the people listening to your show might be familiar with it. Okay, seven, I think about 7 weeks before Kennedy's murdered, these two Cuban exiles appear at a woman's door in the Dallas Fort Worth area. Her name was Sylvia Odio. Her sister was there, Annie. They appeared with a Caucasian guy, all right, who they named as Leon Oswald, all right. They were looking for money for their Cuban exile cause, because Sylvia's father was a wealthy guy in Cuba, okay, who was anti-Castro, but he happened to be in prison at the time at the Isle of Pines. So she said that she couldn't help them. All right. Within 48 hours, the the Cuban guy, one of the Cuban exiles, calls her back and says, "What did you think of Leon Oswald?" And she said, "I didn't think very much of him at all." And he says, "He's kind of loco." All right. He says we should have killed Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs. Now, if you want an example of trying to, put somebody up.
At the table. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't get any more clear than that, I don't think. All right. Now let's take another example that occurred a little bit after that. All right. let's talk about Mexico City. All right. Um, the CIA has never been able to produce a picture of Oswald in Mexico City. Now, this is, you'd figure that if Oswald was in Mexico City, 61 years would be long enough to locate a picture of him, okay?
You would
Because,
think.
yeah, because, you know, the CIA had coverage on both the Russian embassy and the Cuban embassy. What I mean by that, that there were cameras, okay, outside, all right? And one of the cameras was what they call pulse activated. What that meant, what that means is this: when the door opened at the Cuban embassy, the air pressure changed and the camera was rigged to the air pressure. Okay. So, how could you miss taking if Oswald was there, how could you miss taking a picture of him? All right. Well, they brought in the receptionist from the Cuban embassy. All right. And she said, I don't recognize that guy. All right. And then they brought her before the House Select Committee. All right. And they said, how tall was he? And she said, a little bit above my height. She was 5'4". She said, you mean like 5'5"? He goes, yeah, he was short. Oswald was 5'9". Okay. All right. And he had blonde hair. Oswald did not have blonde
This
hair.
isn't working.
Okay. So here you get into another problem here. You know, here we are 7 weeks before the assassination, and it appears somebody is impersonating Oswald first at the Odio house and then at Mexico City. So the Warren Commission had a very serious problem. Very serious problem. Which one of these guys is real and which one of these guys is not real? Okay, and they decided they were going to discredit Sylvia Odio. Okay, discredit her story, even though she had corroboration. Her sister was there, and she had written. Now, get this: she had written 3 people about this incident before the assassination. So, how the heck do you discredit somebody like this? Well, let me tell you a little story about how this worked. Wesley Liebler was one of the lawyers on the Warren Commission. He was sent down to interview Sylvia Odio, okay, for her Warren Commission deposition. They went out to dinner. This is what she told the church committee. She said, he continually threatened me with a lie detector test. All right. Obviously trying to intimidate her.
Intimidator, sure.
Yeah. And then he said, and we have this in the declassified report. Then he said, you know, even if we find evidence of conspiracy, we've been ordered by Justice Earl Warren to cover it up. The investigator had that reaction. His mouth dropped. He said, he said that? And she said, I will swear that under oath on a stack of Bibles that he said that to me. Okay. All right. So this is how determined the Warren Commission was to cover up this Oswald impersonation story. Okay. Because obviously, if somebody's impersonating Oswald in advance of the assassination, that strongly indicates that there's a high level conspiracy going on. All
Sure.
right. Yeah. And so this is why they had to say we don't consider Sylvia Odio a credible, when in fact she was a very credible witness.
But she had to be destroyed.
Right.
Reputationally, she had, or otherwise, if if that didn't work, because clearly, I mean, that's the game changer right there. That's the game ender right there. This is all before the actual
Yes.
assassination. So,
Right.
so you've got all of these impersonations that were found and discovered. And again, was all of this in the Warren Commission report, and was all of this
Oh no,
in
no,
the
no,
in the
no.
select
See what?
committee?
Well, this is what happened. See, the FBI
Well, this couldn't have
did,
been in the Warren Commission report, obviously. That's the
yeah,
point here. But
the
I'm sorry, go ahead.
FBI did a 9 or 10 month investigation with literally hundreds of agents. Okay. And they filed reports. Okay. And so once the Warren report was published and once the volumes were published, researchers went into the archives and found the FBI reports that were not included. Okay. And this is how we discovered all these impersonations of Oswald in these either FBI reports or Secret Service reports. They trickled out during the years, and that's what allowed Matt to go ahead and put together that
Got it.
wonderful essay that you're quoting from. You know,
So this all happened obviously in the subsequent years. So I mentioned they had no choice, but they had to destroy Sylvia, either reputationally or permanently. Which I guess we could go forward now to choke points 4 and 5 and talk about Jack Ruby because he destroyed Lee Harvey Oswald and whatever evidence that he might have been able to present as the defendant in this whole thing. So let's start there because I jokingly, kind of half jokingly, just because the connotation of the name Gambino, when you talk about Robert Gambino, you think about the crime family. But Jack Ruby did have a very, very strong connection to organized crime. Jack Ruby did have access to Lee Harvey Oswald after the shooting that had made no sense whatsoever how he got where he was. So let's see what we can do with chokeholds 4 and 5.
Jack Ruby was associated with organized crime from before he moved to Dallas Fort Worth. Okay, this was up in Chicago. All right. He was like a low level errand boy, in the corrupt unions up there. Then when he moved down to the Dallas Fort Worth area, all right, this is something that the Chicago mob wanted to influence. All right. They wanted some of the action. Okay. All right. And that's one possible reason that Ruby did actually move to Texas. All right. And believe me, there is no doubt that Ruby was involved in illicit activities once he got there. This includes things like gambling, like drug running. Okay. And this is one of the reasons that he, one of his assignments clearly was to corrupt the Dallas police, whichever way he could do it. Okay. And he did it a lot of ways. He did it with free meals. He did it with free drinks. He did it by procuring women, because he had what they call back in those days a strip club. Today we call them a gentleman's club. Okay, but a strip club back there in Dallas. So he employed a lot of these exotic dancers. All right, and so the estimates as to how many policemen knew Jack Ruby are simply off the charts. Okay, some people believe that he knew like 75%, of the police force. Okay, and was on good terms with them. All right, he was also involved in gun running into Cuba. All right, and people actually witnessed some of his activities in the Gulf of Mexico, that shore of Texas. All right, a little town called Kemah, Kemah. All right, and so Ruby was in many ways the perfect guy, all right, for the mob to finger. This is what I believed happened. This is how it happened. Oswald was supposed to have been shot at the Texas Theater, but there were too many people there, and he was screaming, I am not resisting arrest. I am not resisting arrest. So he attracted too much attention.
He
All
knew.
right. Right. And so they couldn't get rid of him there. Then on Saturday night, and remember, he was killed Sunday morning. Okay. On Saturday night, Oswald attempted to make a phone call to North Carolina to a guy named John Hurt. John Hurt was a retired military intelligence officer who was located about a couple hundred miles away from the naval air base called Nag's Head. Nag's Head was the place where they trained defectors going into the Soviet Union. Oswald requested to make that call. The Secret Service rejected it. No, we're not going to let him make that call. But the woman, the secretary who was there, fished the note out of the trash can. And that's how we know about it. All right. A CIA guy named Victor Marchetti, when he heard this story, said, in my opinion, when Oswald tried to make that call, he signed his death warrant because he was clearly trying to get advice on what he should reveal and what he should not reveal and how they were going to help him, okay, etc. So I believe at this point, the CIA called in their buddies. One of the prominent ones was Santo Trafficante. Trafficante was one of the guys involved in the CIA mafia plots to kill Castro. All right. Trafficante was very good friends with Louis McQuilly. Louis McQuilly ran one of Trafficante's clubs in Cuba. All right. He was the manager. Ruby visited McQuilly, okay, in Cuba. All right. All right. Um, there's also a report that Ruby visited Trafficante when he was in detention after Castro overthrew Batista and closed down all the casinos and the hotels. All right. So this is the way I believe this worked. I believe the CIA got in contact with Trafficante. Trafficante got in contact with McQuilly because Ruby said he idolized Louis McQuilly. He would do anything for Louis McQuilly. All right. And I think McQuilly then put him up to doing this thing. Now, the actual murder of Oswald, the Warren Commission covered this up also. There was no way that Oswald came down the Main Street ramp. Okay, there was a guard there who swore and passed his polygraph test that Ruby did not come down that Main Street ramp. All right. The reason that he passed his polygraph test and the Warren Commission had to lie about this is that Oswald came in the back way. All right. Somebody opened the door for him from the back because his excuse was he was delivering a telegram with money in it to one of his girls. All right. I if you ever have been to the site, you'll see that office, that Western Union office, is within 200 feet of the Dallas Police headquarters. So all somebody had to do was open the door, wave, and let Ruby in. Okay. Now,
Mhm.
if you watch films of this, it's very interesting because it's pretty clear that Ruby is hiding behind a guy named Blackie Harrison, a big husky guy who worked for the Dallas cops. He's hiding behind him very visibly. All right. Then when Oswald comes out to the foyer, a horn goes off. All right. When he begins walking forward, another horn goes off. And then Ruby jumps forward and he shoots Oswald. If you haven't seen films of this, you really should. Okay. It's incredible. There's 80 people in that basement, as many news guys as there are policemen, but he bursts through the crowd and he pumps this one bullet into Oswald's stomach, and that's it. That's it. Another thing that's very interesting is that if you look at when they're walking out, there was supposed to be a four-pocket protection. That is one guy behind him, one guy in front of him, two to the side.
Sure.
Will Fritz, Will Fritz, who was supposed to be in front, broke the formation. Okay, he ran out in front, thus leaving him wide open from the front.
Mhm.
Okay, one last point. Okay, It's everybody down there recognized who Ruby was. Okay, because like I said, he knew more than half the cops. Talk to the cops after Ruby killed Oswald and see how many of them say that they knew Jack Ruby. Very, very few. All right. So what I'm saying is there was clearly a cover up inside the Dallas Police Department about their associations with Jack Ruby.
Two things in follow up to that. First, the last one is just a superficial one. I wonder why Ruby wouldn't have one of his associates do this. If they came to, if whoever is behind all of this, we're going to set it up, we're going to get you in there, you're down there doing your telegram thing or whatever, we'll wave you in, everything you just described. Why wouldn't he say, I can get somebody, I can get a guy, I got a guy, I got a guy. And by the way, after he takes out Oswald, make sure you take him out so we're all in the clear. Why would Ruby go through this himself?
If my, and I'm labeling this as a theory, okay, I like
Okay,
to work in facts, but whenever I say something like this, I will label it as a theory.
fair enough.
I, I believe that A, he would not turn down McQuilly if McQuilly asked him directly to do it. Okay. B, I think he was told that Jack, look, with everybody feeling the way they do about Kennedy's death and everybody hating this Oswald guy, the most you'll get is maybe 5 years suspended to 2. Okay. Which by the way, is probably what would have happened if Ruby had been, if his appeal had actually gone through, which it actually did. All right. But he died, in prison of cancer before he could stand trial. So again, this is speculation on my part. Okay. But I believe that's the way it happened.
The other one I was following up on, the other point there is I was familiar with most of what you described, except the horns. I'd never heard about the horns, as if
Oh,
those are
you know
alert.
why? Do you know
Let's
why you never
go.
heard about the horns?
No,
Because they were edited out.
really?
Yes, yes. The NBC had the live feed, okay, of this event. All right.
What kind of horns are we talking about, by the way?
Car horns.
So somebody from outside, a vehicle outside, is that what we're saying?
No, inside the parking lot.
In the garage. Okay, okay.
Yeah, right, right.
So
See,
so so though you're saying though those were basically alerts. One horn means get
no,
out of the
no,
way.
no,
Second horn means back.
hold it. I'm not saying that. See, this is where people get
Okay,
me in
that's
trouble.
how I'm
Okay,
hearing it. That's how I'm
okay.
hearing it. Okay,
I
maybe I'm
don't
hearing it wrong.
know if it was on purpose or if it was a coincidence, but this is what I'm saying.
Why
They
would
were
they edit them
edited.
out?
They were edited out. Okay, and you know how I found out about this?
Hmm.
A guy named Ray Marcus calls me up one day and he goes, Jim, what version of Ruby shooting Oswald do you have? I said, what are you talking about? What version? He goes, do you have the no horns? Do you have the one horn? Or do you have the two horn version? And I said, I have the one horn version. Then you have the edited version. I'll
Wow.
send you the real one. I'll send you the real. And so he sends it to me, and I'm watching this, and I go, "Oh my god, they edited this out." Now what could possibly be the reason? Well, again, this is one of these things that lends itself to suspicion. They
Yeah,
didn't want the timing to look as obvious as it does.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and
Well,
so that's what I believe happened, and I think that's a pretty
that's a
informed
reasonable.
speculation.
That's a
Yeah,
reasonable theory, and I respect the fact they're calling that a theory because everything else you're talking about here and everything that's in this book is based on facts. So I'm
right.
glad to get that out there. But I hear it that way, and I think that's the reason why they edited it because anybody, an average guy, average person would hear a horn, see the activity, a second horn, here comes a shooter. They would absolutely think the whole thing was staged and played that way. So,
Right.
but what we've done here, Jim, is we have gone right to the assassination or the killing, if you will, murder of Oswald, and we've skipped right over the killing of Kennedy. So we're talking about conspiratorial evidence. We're talking about impersonations. We're talking about connections and so forth. Let's talk about physical evidence now. Specifically, let's talk about Kennedy's brain because there are a lot of questions here that a lot of people don't know with respect to what happened to Kennedy's brain, why it was not preserved, and a whole lot of discrepancy about the size of it considering what happened to him. Can you take us through some of that?
Well, the most suspicious thing is it disappeared.
Yeah.
Okay, it disappeared from the National Archives. It was supposed to be there. Cyril Wecht went in there. Dr. Cyril Wecht went in there in 1965, and he discovered it wasn't there. Okay, it had somehow been spirited away. Okay, now let's go back to the beginning, because I believe I wrote this particular essay, and I believe that this is one of the most compelling pieces of evidence that there is in the whole Kennedy case, and it's the kind of thing you could bring into a courtroom. All right, in a gunshot homicide case, you are supposed to dissect the wounds in the victim because you want to find out, number one, the trajectory of the bullet, and you want to find out if there's any bullet fragments left, inside the victim's body. Now, if it's a gunshot wound to the head, what you do is something called you section the brain. What does that mean? That means you do one of two techniques. You either cut the brain like a bread loaf with what they call parallel cuts, all right, or you do what they call a pie cut, all right, which is diagonal. And why do you do this? Because you want to find out the path the bullet took to the brain and if there's any more bullets still in the brain or fragments. One of the most shocking things about the Kennedy case is that this was never done. Kennedy's brain was never sectioned. And by the way, his back wound was never dissected either. So this leads to a very serious problem, you know, of directionality. Well, how do you know where it entered? And this is going to complicate that question.
Hmm.
42 witnesses at Parkland and at Bethesda testified that they saw a baseball sized wound in the back of Kennedy's skull. Now, most people know that a bullet, when it enters a target, will make what they call a small penetrating wound.
Mhm.
Okay, usually it has even edges. When it exits the target, it will leave a large, okay, avulsive, uneven edged wound, okay, because it's carrying all this blood and tissue with it. Well, this would strongly indicate that Kennedy was hit from the front. Now, making this even worse is this: there was a Dutch study of brain weight in which they examined 8,000 brains. The average weight for a guy of Kennedy's height, 6'1", 180, all right, would be about 1,340 grams. All right. Now, when the brain was finally weighed, and by the way, it was not weighed that night at the autopsy. Let me repeat that. It was not weighed that night at the autopsy as it should have been. All right. It came in at 1,500 grams. In other words, is 160 grams over the average. Now, what makes that so unbelievable is this. If you look at the Zapruder film, all right, you will see Kennedy. In fact, it's probably one of those marked things on that film is the head explosion. And then you see this blood and tissue going up into the air. All right. Then you take a look at the
And
pictures of
all
the
over
back.
Jackie. She was wearing half of his brain.
Yeah, right, right.
I mean,
I was going to get to that.
I'm
Okay.
sorry.
There's all this blood and tissue in the back of the car. And anybody can see that by pictures. There's all this blood all over Jackie Kennedy's beautiful suit. One of the motorcycle drivers on the left side of Kennedy said he was hit so hard with the brain tissue that he thought it was a bullet. When they got to the hospital, his partner said, "You got some of Kennedy's brain in your teeth." Okay. And so then when Jackie Kennedy, there's a famous film of her reaching out the back of the trunk. And they asked her, "What were you doing?" "I was trying to retrieve part of my husband's brain." And by the way, she gave it to one of the doctors at Parkland Hospital. All right. So, how in God's name can Kennedy's brain weigh more than the average when there's all this indisputable evidence that the thing was all over Dealey Plaza? How
Yeah.
could it weigh more than the average? Now, if you think that's bad, it's about to get even worse. The Warren Commission never examined John Stringer. John Stringer was the official autopsy photographer for the Kennedy case. The ARB, the review board, did examine him. And they asked him all about how he took pictures, et cetera, the kind of camera he used, the kind of film he used, et cetera. And then they took him in to a private room where there was an easel set up and the pictures of Kennedy's brain were there. Stringer walks over to the easel, very, very puzzled. And he says, "This is Ansco film. I didn't use Ansco. I used Kodak Ektachrome film. And you see these numbers here on the bottom right of the picture? That means this was taken in a press pack, which means it was taken in series. I didn't use a press pack. Okay. I used dual folders. I took them individually." And so Jeremy Gunn says, "Are you ready to deny that you took these pictures?" And Stringer says, "If that's Ansco, and if this is a press pack, I didn't take these pictures." All right. Now, this leads to the question, who did take the pictures? And why did you need a second photographer in this case? All right. So this is all, very, very intriguing. Well, it's more than that. I think it's incriminating. All right. And the reason I like all this kind of evidence is because this is the kind of stuff that you can bring into a courtroom. All right. Now, what I mean by that is this: if you're going to introduce either an illustration or a picture, the court says that you have to have the guy who either did the drawing or took the picture, and he has to testify that that is what he did. All right. So here you have Stringer on the stand saying, "No, I didn't use Ansco film. No, I never used a press pack." Okay. And then you could blow up the case beginning right there, getting into all these other matters that I mentioned. So the question then becomes, was Kennedy's brain too damaged for them to want to put it into evidence? Is that what they did? They disappeared his brain because it would have revealed too much damage and maybe two bullets? I mean, again, I will label that as theorizing, but I'm theorizing from
But that's
very incriminating
responsible.
facts.
That's yeah, but you could also call that, a responsible hunch. I mean, if there's bullet fragments from more than one bullet inside that brain, then the whole narrative is gone. You're right
Right.
about the size of the wound on the back, because it's bigger on the way out. Everything that you're talking about is real, and so they didn't section it. They didn't. What
Right.
was the pie one called? The bread one was one, and the pie kind
The
was the other.
the pie cut is a diagonal cut.
Yeah.
Okay. The parallel one is a straight cut all the way
Parallel or
through.
diagonal. There you go. Okay, so
Yeah.
so they didn't do any of those things. They didn't weigh the brain initially. Where did that weight come from? The 16
That was like weeks later.
So they didn't do it right. They didn't do it at
Uh,
the
They
time of the
didn't do they didn't do it that night, which when they should have done it.
yeah.
Okay.
And suddenly
Yeah.
there's a lot more brain than there was before. And
And
we're
it's
we're not supposed to.
1,500 grams, which is
Wow.
crazy, you
Yeah.
know?
when half
Yeah,
of it is all over Daily Plaza, the Plaza, like you
yeah,
said. So,
yeah. So
so
now, if you can believe it, if you can, well, you can after this. Okay, I have read, as most people who are, proficient in this, I have read Arlen Specter's examination of Jim Humes, Pierre Fink, and Thornton Boswell, and those were the three doctors that were examining Kennedy's body that night. Go ahead and see if you see this subject mentioned, because you won't. He never brought this up, and he questioned all three of them. But to me, this is, I believe, one of the most important aspects. And I'm not going to just say the medical evidence, I'm saying in the entire case. I believe it's one of the most important aspects in the entire case.
um, Arlen Specter, since you brought him up, I guess we can use this to go to the bullet, right? To the magic bullet.
C399.
Yes. Um, Arlen Specter, who was he was on the commission working for Ford, right? Or for Gerald Ford.
Well, he
That's
was actually working for Earl Warren. He was the boss. Okay, but he
okay.
was associated with Ford, of course.
Okay. Okay.
Because he
There.
was
I mean,
one of
I
the
say
more
Ford
busy.
kind of Ford got him on the commission, is what I mean to say, right? Isn't that
Oh,
kind of the
I'm not sure about that. That might be
okay?
true. Yeah.
Okay. So Arlen Specter, and I'm trying to lead you into a deeper explanation here about the third bullet, said something to the effect of, words to the effect of, when asked why the commission has to decide and settle on three bullets and not a fourth bullet. It's because if there's a fourth bullet, there's a second shooter. If there's a second shooter, every single thing about this is now gone. It is everything is exposed and so on and so forth. So he had to, and they had to find a way to make three bullets the only bullets that were fired. Because of what? Because of shell casings. They only found three shell casings up in the book depository,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, yeah. So explain the magic bullet as you understand it. We've all seen JFK, the movie. We've all heard it over and over again. But explain it to those who don't quite understand what Specter and the commission want all of us to believe happened with that third bullet.
Look, before I get on that, let me give you the exact quote,
Okay.
because he said this to Edward Epstein, the writer, but Epstein did not make it public until 2015. All right, this is what he said. We either go with the magic bullet, or we start looking for a second assassin. And that's how I explained it to the Warren Commission. Now, obviously, they didn't want to look for a second assassin, and so they went with the magic bullet. All right, this
That,
is this
that
is
first of all, that quote is remarkable. And that's the one I was referring to. I didn't have it
yeah,
by word for word. So thank you for that. Secondly, you're saying that wasn't really revealed until 2015?
right. That quote from Spectre was not revealed in 2015.
And again, it's I'll ask you again. It's a question you have no answer for, which is why. How in the world is that kept quiet for all of this time? Nobody believed in the third bullet, or the single bullet theory, I should say, that did all of that damage anyway. But so there he is, essentially admitting the reason why we settled on this is because otherwise we would have to say that there were two shooters, and if there were two shooters, everything is gone. So I'm sorry
Right.
for interrupting your thought here, but
Now,
tell everybody about that single bullet.
let me enumerate the specifics of this. Since you said this, there were three shells found on the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository, which necessitated for the commission that they were basically shackled to three bullets fired. All right. So this is what happened. One bullet missed the entire car, bounced off the curb, and hit James Tagg, a bystander, in the cheek, extracting blood. Okay, that's one. Obviously, Z frame 313 depicts Kennedy being hit in the head
Mhm.
and rocketing backwards in the car. So that's two. Now you're down to one bullet. Okay, by necessity, you're down to one bullet now. Well, here's the problem: this one bullet has to account for 7 wounds in 2 people, Kennedy and Conley, and it smashed 2 bones in Conley's body, one of his ribs and the wrist bone. But even further, it then ends up, it smashed his right wrist. It
Mhm.
ends up in his upper left thigh. Okay. And then somehow, through reverse trajectory, it fell out of his thigh and ended up underneath the mat of a gurney, where Arlen Specter says that had to be Connolly's uh, gurney. Okay. And by the way, it wasn't. All right. But that is the magic bullet. Now, what makes the magic bullet so puzzling is that if you look at it, it's pretty much unscathed. How could it smash 2 bones in Conley and emerge virtually unscathed? All right. Now, in the book, you'll see that we put in some new stuff about the magic bullet. All right. The, the FBI technician, Robert Frazier, all right, who the ballistics evidence was supposed to be given to that night. Okay. He was their foremost expert on this issue. If you take a look at his notes, it says that the bullet, the gurney bullet, arrived at 7:30. Now, here's what makes this so bizarre. If you look at the FBI reports, all right, that bullet did not get to Washington until 8:50. All right. So if it got to, and it was transferred at the White House. All right. So in other words, if you take a look at from the distance from the White House FBI headquarters, I had to take another 20 minutes or so, all right, to get there. How did the bullet get there at 7:30 if it wasn't in Washington till 8:50? Okay, so this is again, this is something that suggests what we call a a very big break in the chain of custody. Now, if you know anything about chain of custody, and in the film that you talked about, JFK Revisited,
Mhm.
we had 2 experts talking about chain of custody. All right. Chain of custody is very, very important in a criminal case. All right. Because if you don't have chain of custody, the defense can start to blow holes, okay, in the evidentiary trail of your case and suggest things like alteration and even substitution. All right. And that's these 2 examples I just talked about, CE 399, the magic bullet, and Kennedy's brain, would be very, very ripe for this kind of cross examination. I don't believe that CE 399 was fired in Dealey Plaza that day for the reasons that I mentioned above. And there's also some other reasons. But that's why I don't believe it was fired in Dealey Plaza that day.
Let's come back to the magic bullet for a moment, or in a moment, but the first bullet you talked about, the one that missed the car completely, because you got 3 bullets supposedly fired from the same rifle, from the same guy, from the same vantage point. 2 of them are such great shots. One of them hits Kennedy in the back, right? The one that comes out his throat.
Yes.
The other one
Yes.
that supposedly hits it. But we can talk about that too, because remember we talked about it exits the body with a bigger, circumference
Yes.
wound than it enters. Yet it came out in a very small space of his throat, very small and close, and,
Yes.
and, and
Yes.
intact enough to go into another body, come
Right.
out the other body, then hit another part of the body, and then hit a third part of the body. Right? It
Yes.
went through Connolly, hit his rib, then out, then hit his wrist, and then back in again to the thigh.
Right.
So I mean that bullet window did a lot of things.
Anything
But
you want, it'll do
yeah,
it for you.
it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. But the first one, so this shooter was so good that he was like on point, bing bing, and the other one missed the car altogether and hit a guy, a bystander who wasn't even by the car, right? I mean, wasn't
It
he?
was on a different street.
That's where I'm going with this. Tell me about that part.
All right. The Tag
Hey,
hit,
yeah.
or James Tag was the bystander. See, what you said is exactly correct. How could somebody get two direct hits on the target? Okay. But then on another shot, not only does he miss the target, not only does he miss the car, the entire limousine, all right, but he actually hits a different guy on a different street because Kennedy's going down Elm.
Hmm.
Okay, Tag is on Commerce Street. All right, and so he goes, according to Hoover, that shot went 15 feet over the car. Okay, all right, and it had a trajectory that led it to Commerce Street. It bounced off the curb and hits Tag in the face. Now, the FBI did everything they could to cover this up. All right. I mean, and they pulled out all the stops. They denied it existed. They actually went back and tried to re-cement the curb. Okay. So that the break in the curb from the bullet would not be so evident. Okay. But it's very obvious because people went down there and looked at it that somebody re-cemented the curb because it was a different hue. Okay. All right. Hoover did not want to admit this. And the reason he did not want to admit it is because Hoover never believed a single bullet theory. Okay. He always maintained that the three hits all came into the car. All right. Which was more believable, of course, but there was no denying what happened to Tag. Okay. That was the problem. And so the Warren Commission eventually gave in to this issue. All right. I think it was in April of 1964. And this is what necessitated Arlen Specter to invent the single bullet theory.
So very, very small, compact look at this. So the brain, first of all, they don't know where it is now. Second of all, they didn't weigh it then. They didn't cross section it then to find out all of those things that you were talking about. You got the size of the wound. You've got the magic bullet. You've got I'm just sticking on the physical stuff right now. You've got the first bullet, which is almost a magic bullet 2.0 because of what they're saying that it did. You know, if it came from the same place, hit that curb and hit a guy on a different street, for crying out loud. And they covered up all of it. You got the different photographs with the photographer saying that's not mine.
Mhm.
You're paving over the cement where the bullet hit the curb. I mean, I don't understand why there is anybody who looks at this now and still buys the lone nut theory, as it's
Yeah,
called.
it's pretty hard to believe. But let me add one other thing. You mentioned almost a second magic bullet. There was
Yeah.
a second magic bullet. And let me explain what I mean by that.
All right.
The headshot to Kennedy, this bullet ends up, according to the official story. And remember, I don't believe this stuff. I'm just telling what the Warren report says. Okay. The head and tail of this bullet that hit Kennedy in the skull allegedly ended up in the front seat of the car. Not, excuse me, not the front seat, the front floor of the car, which leaves the question, where did the middle part go? All right. And the answer to that question is that middle part is supposed to be, at least this is what the x-rays say, in the back of Kennedy's skull, almost right, barely penetrating the bone. Okay. And it's called the 6.5 millimeter fragment because that's the dimensions of the bullet. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, let me ask you this. How in God's name did the back of the bullet, the back end of the bullet, go over the middle part of the bullet and fly through Kennedy's head and end up on the front floor of the car with the middle part of the bullet staying where it was? How does something like that happen? And of
I'm not.
course,
I'm not a physicist, but I mean, that was the first thing I thought when you said only the tail and the head of the bullet were in the front floor of the car. I'm like, where's
yeah.
the middle part? It's still stuck there. I don't get that. I mean, I could
Mm,
see maybe any of the other. I could see the tip of the bullet and the middle part of the bullet going through, but the back being getting caught on bone or
right,
something.
right.
Maybe, or maybe the the tip of the bullet or whatever hit bone and got stuck right there while the rest of the bullet kind of cascaded around it. I don't know, but the middle, I don't understand that either.
And
Um,
here's another question: why did that bullet break apart, but CE 399 did not? It stayed intact.
it had a
You
lot more
know.
work to do. I mean, it had a mission and it wasn't going to give it up for anything. No, I mean, all of these things. I mean, what what you've been doing this for a long time, and
Yes,
people like you.
three
I mean,
decades.
I don't know how many books and documentaries have been made on this over the course of 60 years, countless. Um, what percentage of the population do you think believes that this was John? Excuse me. There was Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK. He was, livid over this or that or the other. He was a Soviet. He was, excuse me, yeah, Soviet defector who was just, working for the communists, maybe working for the Cubans, but he was by himself and the government had no cover up. I mean, do you think there's a significant portion of the population that still thinks this?
According to the latest polls, 35%.
So 65% say no way it was a lone gunman,
Yeah.
and 60, okay. Well, I guess that's a little bit better than what it used to be. I don't know. Maybe another 60 years go by and
Yeah,
maybe they'll have
actually, that is a little bit better than it used to be. When
yeah.
Oliver Stone's movie came out, if you recall, back in 91, 92, it was actually up to like close to 90% did not believe the Warren Commission. But what's happened since, there was such a reaction to that film that the MSM went kind of hog wild trying to discredit both the film and Oliver,
Mhm.
and they spent all these intervening decades pumping out these terrible documentaries. Okay, that Peter Jennings would be one example. Dan Rather, before he got fired, would be another example. Okay, and uh, they've done everything they could. Oh, and by the way, and cable, which is one of the worst participants in this. Cable has put out these really, really bad films, on this subject. And so they've done everything they could to try and reinstate the verdict of the Warren Commission.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. That's a good way to say that. Had had things turned out differently, well, I guess I'm trying to find a way to close this. We're already past our time here, but I wanted to ask you if Oswald had gone to trial. Do you think a jury, because your book is premised on this, 10 with these 10 chokeholds, these are things that people didn't know probably though in 1963, so a jury in 1963, what do you think would have happened there? And then secondly, why would they have been so sloppy in the way they tried to cover everything up? What I mean by that is, the stringer, looks at the film and says, that's not the kind of film I use. That's not the kind of, what was it called? The stack,
The press pack.
press pack. Yeah. I mean, these are in the bullet arriving at 7 or being there since 7:30, but not arriving until 8:50. All of those things would seem to be, we're going to have to explain that. You would think they'd be a lot better at it if all of the resources that were going to be marshaled together to carry out this hit, you'd think they would have been a hell of a lot better at this. So we wouldn't know all of these things. So I know those are two very separate questions, but try to answer them both. What do you think happens if this goes to a jury in 63, 64? And,
Yeah.
and what do you think? What do you make of the fact that some people are going to say it's just too wild for them to be this sloppy and have all of these things happen?
All right, during the first question, it would depend on who the lawyer was. All right. If Oswald had a good, like, Mark Lane wanted to represent him, I believe that if somebody like that would have been representing Oswald, I don't think he would have been convicted. Okay. It was very difficult even at that time. Okay. Because Mark Lane wrote one of the earliest critiques of the Warren Report, which was published like 3 weeks out, 2 weeks after Kennedy was killed. All right. And Bob Tannenbaum, who was a deputy chief counsel for the House Select Committee, very good lawyer, 7 years, ran the homicide department in New York. He said the same thing. He said you couldn't convict Oswald in any court in America with the evidence the Warren Commission gave you. All right. Secondly, see, Alan Dulles said when they were debating how much material they should let loose, Alan Dulles said, let's let's let loose a lot of it. Nobody reads anymore. A few college professors will read it, but that's going to be about it. And so the Warren Commission published 26 volumes of evidence, 17,000 pages, all right, thinking nobody was going to read it. Well, the problem was that there were some very smart people who decided to read those 26 volumes, like Sylvia Marr, like Harold Weisberg, etc. See, the Warren Commission never believed that people would get this far into the weeds about this case. And I also believe, and I think this is true, that the Warren Commission was agenda driven from the beginning. All right. So they were willing to believe all this false evidence that people like J. Edgar Hoover and James Rowley of the Secret Service, that they were submitting to them. They would question very little of it, if any of it. In fact, they even said, J. Lee Rankin, the chief counsel, even told Hoover, you know, we have to do something about Sylvia Odio. She either has to be proved or disproved. And this was really late in the process, I think August of 64. All right. And so they cooperated. And it goes back to what Specter said. It's either we accept the magic bullet or we start looking for a second assassin. And there's no way in God's green earth that they wanted to do that. All right. Okay. And so that's why they went along with this terrible cover up.
So just to put a cap on the Oswald part of that, um, is it your belief that Oswald did shoot Kennedy or shoot
No,
at Kennedy?
no,
That was just one of multiple shooters, and that's where the conspiracy comes in, or he was not a part of it at all.
no. I don't think Oswald fired at anybody that day. Okay.
Okay.
And we didn't go into all the
So when
evidence
you
against
so when
him.
you say when you say he'd be acquitted, Jim, you're not just not guilty because there's enough reasonable doubt, but you like literally didn't do it. Was every bit the patsy that he claimed that he was, and that many other people believe as well.
Why did Sebastian Latona find no fingerprints on that rifle? Sebastian Latona was the FBI expert, the fingerprinting department. He was, according to Bob Tannenbaum, he was the foremost expert on this in the country. You felt fortunate to get him at your trial because every DA in the country wanted him to testify at their trial. Okay. He got the rifle that night. He did everything, literally everything. Okay. When he couldn't find any fingerprints, he broke apart the rifle into its you know, individual
Points.
parts, and
Right.
and he brought in a photographer, and they brought in these lights, and they did everything. They highlighted it, they angled it, they tried everything they could to get fingerprints off that rifle. Okay, he was up to 4 o'clock in the morning, all right, and he couldn't do it. Now, if Sebastian Latona, the foremost guy in the country, couldn't get Oswald's fingerprints off that rifle, that means they weren't on there. Okay.
That's a I'm glad I asked that last question almost as just a follow-up, because I mean, so now we've gone from there was a second shooter, we just don't know who it was, to we don't know who any of the shooters were. If Oswald
I
wasn't, I mean, because I think most people who believe in the conspiracy for a million of the reasons you've already laid out believe that Oswald shot, yeah, but there were a whole bunch of other people too, or at least one other person, maybe two other people, and so forth. But this is a different story altogether. Right now, we're saying this is an unsolved mystery where we will never know who any of the shooters were.
I
Much
I
less,
think that's accurate. I
wow,
think that's accurate. All
wow.
right, and the evidence indicates Oswald was either uh, on the first floor or he was outside. That's what the evidence indicates. He wasn't on the sixth floor.
See, once more of the sloppiness, though. Again, one would think that we're going to do this, we're this, just cover everything up. We also have to make sure that his fingerprints are on a gun someplace if we're going to pin this on him.
Yeah.
You're going to skip over that? I mean, really?
Mm. Oh
There's
well,
just
but if you want to finish a circle on that, see, when Latona couldn't find any fingerprints on the rifle, it went back to Dallas. Okay, and guess what? I found them. I
oh,
found
yeah, what
them.
happened?
Yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that part. I didn't know that part. So they could
So in
find
other
those.
words,
So they could find those, but they still can't find Kennedy's brain. It's not where.
so
Where's
in
that?
other words, Sebastian Latona, who had the rifle right there, went over it all night. He couldn't find Oswald's fingerprints on the rifle, the foremost expert in the country. But you get this guy in the Dallas Police Department after, and he says, "Oh, here they are." Even the Warren Commission didn't believe that one. Okay.
Wow. Well, you know, the more I hear about this, the more I've learned from you and your colleagues through this book and everything else, the more I'm starting to realize that maybe, you know, what happened to Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, and the comedy of errors there. I mean, you know, I'm sorry, too many coincidences are not coincidences.
The Secret
You know,
Service in this country has gotten away with so much bad behavior and so much malfeasance. It's really a disgrace. You know, you from the Kennedy assassination to what happened in Butler. I mean, you know, they're really, you know, floating around a canoe without an oar. You know, and they've never been called on the carpet, at least not completely. Well, they made that woman resign over the Trump incident. You know,
right. That was
but
it.
Rowley should have been fired, I think, back in 1963.
Well,
Oh,
you know what?
to close the show, I'm sure you're familiar with this story. The Secret Service agents at the cellar. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not sure.
The night before Kennedy's assassination,
Mm-hmm.
about 9 Secret Service agents stayed out after hours. Okay. They hired the fire department to guard Kennedy. The fire department. All right. And they went carousing to an after hours joint called the Cellar. The Cellar served hard liquor. Okay. And these guys were there till 3 o'clock in the morning with a 7 o'clock call coming up just 4 hours away. And Rowley wanted to cover this up, the chief of the Secret Service, you know, but it managed to leak out later. That is just disgraceful.
It is.
Okay, when you have a 7 o'clock call, you know, so that maybe that's why when you look at the film, you look at the Zapruder film,
Yeah.
the only agent that reacts is Clint Hill. You know,
And he wasn't one of them. Maybe he was out carousing.
yeah, I don't know if he was at the cellar or not. You know,
Yeah. But that's a pretty no, I did not know that's part of the story. That's a pretty remarkable
yeah.
add-on to this thing. Well, I'll tell you what, Jim. Fascinating conversation, fascinating book. The JFK assassination chokeholds that inescapably prove there was a conspiracy. There it is on your screen. Make sure that you find this. Came out last year, and we're just a couple of weeks away from the 61st, right? 61st anniversary of the killing of JFK.
Isn't that really hard to believe? It's next
Yeah,
month.
yeah.
It's just,
That's freaking me out. Yeah. Jim, DiEugenio,
right.
not the easiest word to say, but I've been working on it. Jim, thank
Yeah.
you for coming on here. Thank you for writing it and trying to shine the light of truth on something that so many of us have been wanting to know the truth about for so many years. And this is as compelling of a case you make for a conspiracy as any I've ever seen. So really appreciate
Thank you
that.
so much.
Thank you for doing it. All
Have a
right.
good day.
There you go. That's Strictly Speaking for today. Look, this is obviously a fascinating topic. That's a fascinating guest. Share this with people in your social circles. And make sure if you're watching on YouTube or on Rumble or if you're listening on Spotify, make sure you click like, give us a follow, and make sure you click that alert button so that you can get great new content like this every time we drop it for you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Strictly Speaking.